Welcome back to Mid Medicine. Let's jump right into our brand new explainer on what I absolutely love calling the body's master symphony, endocrinology. We've put together a ton of great graphics for this one, and we're going to use them to break down exactly how your body's chemical messengers keep everything in perfect harmony and, well, what happens when that harmony breaks down. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll meet the chemical messengers. Then we'll look at the body's control systems, map out the major endocrine axes, explore what clinical disease looks like when things go wrong, and finally, wrap up with how we diagnose these incredibly subtle disorders. Let's get going. Section 1. Meet the chemical messengers. Because, to understand the symphony, you gotta know the instruments, right? So what exactly are these messengers? Well, quite simply, they're hormones. Hormones are endogenous messengers, meaning they're created from within, produced by specialized endocrine glands or even just single cells. Their main gig is signal transduction. They travel through your bloodstream to influence metabolic rates and direct the function of other organs. Literally, they are your body's dedicated, highly regulated communication network. Now, a hormone's classification dictates exactly how it gets into our cells. On one side, we've got lipophilic hormones, like steroids and thyroid hormones. Because they love fat, they just diffuse right through the lipid membrane of a cell, bind to receptors inside, and directly affect transcription. This usually means a delayed onset, but, long-term effects. On the flip side, we have hydrophilic, or water-soluble hormones, like peptides. These guys cannot pass through the lipid membrane, so they essentially have to ring the doorbell. They bind to surface receptors on the outside of the cell to trigger a cascade inside. But here is a really critical concept. A message is only useful if it stops once it's been delivered. If hormones just kept floating around forever, our bodies would be in total chaos. So the body has to take out the trash through degradation pathways. Steroid and thyroid hormones are mostly inactivated in the liver and excreted in bile. Catecholamines, they're enzymatically degraded and tossed out in the urine. And peptide hormones are broken down by proteins, mainly in the liver and kidneys. Section 2. The body's control systems. Now that we know the instruments and how they're cleared away, we need to understand the conductor's rules. How does the body keep this whole thing from spiraling out of control? The answer lies in negative feedback loops. Think of it exactly like the thermostat in your house. When it gets too hot, the heater turns off. Simple. In your body, the hypothalamus acts as that ultimate thermostat. When an endocrine gland produces a hormone, that hormone actually travels back up to inhibit the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus from making more of the stimulating signal. We call that a long-loop feedback. Pituitary hormones can also inhibit the hypothalamus. That's a short loop. Heck, the hypothalamus can even inhibit itself, which is an ultra-short loop. This whole system ensures hormone levels stay perfectly balanced. But there is a rare exception to the thermostat rule, and that's positive feedback. This is when a hormone actually enhances its own production. The absolute classic example here is childbirth. Uterine stretching triggers the release of oxytocin, which causes contractions. Those contractions cause more stretching, which triggers even more oxytocin. The body is intentionally amplifying the signal to achieve a massive, very specific physiological event. All right, moving to Section 3, mapping the endocrine axes. Let's see how all this builds into the grand schematic of the body. Inside you, the ultimate relay race is happening every single second. At the very top, you have the hypothalamus, the master controller. It hands the baton down to the anterior or posterior pituitary gland. Then the pituitary hands that baton to the target gland, like your thyroid, the adrenal cortex, or the gonads. Finally, those target hormones dictate your metabolism, growth, stress response, and reproduction. It is just an elegant, cascading waterfall of chemical signals. Which brings us to Section 4, when things go wrong. Because what happens when this delicate relay race drops the baton? Clinically, endocrine diseases fundamentally boil down to these core classifications. You can have hormone excess, so maybe a gland is overproducing. You can have a hormone deficiency, where the gland just fails. You can have hypersensitivity, where the target organ is overreacting. Or hormone resistance, where the target organ simply ignores the signal, kind of like what we see in type 2 diabetes. And finally, you can have non-functioning tumors that just take up space and mess up the local architecture. So the really crucial point in diagnosis is figuring out exactly where the failure happened in that relay race. We classify these by origin. A primary disease means the final target gland itself is broken, like the adrenal cortex in Addison disease. A secondary disease means the target gland is totally fine, but the pituitary gland above it is issuing the wrong orders, like in Cushing disease. And a tertiary disease, that means the very top boss, the hypothalamus, is malfunctioning. This right here is exactly why endocrinology requires brilliant medical detectives. Just think about these symptoms. Patients present with things that are incredibly nonspecific. Lethargy and depression, that could be hypothyroidism, or it could be diabetes, or even adrenal insufficiency. Weight loss might be an overactive thyroid, or again, diabetes. Polyuria, excessive peeing, that could be diabetes mellitus or diabetes insipidus. Doctors literally have to use these everyday symptoms to track down the hidden chemical culprits. And that naturally leads us to Section 5, diagnosing endocrine disorders. How do we actually confirm these suspicions in the clinic? Well, we follow a very specific hierarchy of clinical investigation. First, we might do direct measurement of blood levels, but often we need dynamic testing, meaning we stimulate a gland to see if it can wake up, or we inhibit it to see if we can turn it off. Only after we have biochemical confirmation do we move to imaging, like ultrasounds or scans. And listen, this is absolutely vital. Many endocrine glands have benign bumps called incidentalomas. If you scan too early without doing the blood work first, you risk finding a completely meaningless bump and subjecting the patient to unnecessary stress or even unnecessary surgery. Always, always confirm the dysfunction biochemically first. And that brings me to my absolute favorite takeaway from today's explainer. Here is a massive clinical pearl for you. The human body is not a static machine. It is a highly dynamic, rhythmic organism. The release of many hormones is rhythmical. They're released in pulses, or on a circadian day-night rhythm, or even a monthly rhythm. So if you just take a random blood measurement at 2 p.m., it might look artificially high or low simply because of the body's natural clock. This is exactly why sequential or dynamic tests are so strictly required. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. How might your daily rhythms, your sleep cycle, your stress levels, your eating habits be affecting your very own master symphony of hormones right now? It's pretty fascinating to think about how our daily environment interacts directly with our internal chemical messengers. Thank you so much for watching. We absolutely love bringing you these heavily visual, structured deep dives. Be sure to stick around for more right here on Mid Medicine.